At Ridgewood University, the air buzzed with the energy of students rushing between classes. The campus was alive with the sound of footsteps on cobblestone paths, the rustle of papers being shuffled into backpacks, and the occasional burst of laughter from groups gathered under trees. Among these students was Karoline Leavitt, a sophomore who blended seamlessly into the crowd. She wasn't loud or flashy. Instead, she carried herself with quiet confidence, her head often buried in a notebook filled with equations that most people wouldn't understand. Karoline had always been drawn to numbers. From a young age, she found comfort in their predictability, their logic. While other kids played outside, she would sit at the kitchen table scribbling solutions to problems, far beyond her years. Her parents, both teachers, encouraged her curiosity, but never pushed her too hard. They knew she had a gift, though they didn't fully grasp its magnitude. To them, Karoline was simply their daughter, a thoughtful, kind girl who loved math more than anything else. This semester, Karoline was enrolled in Advanced Calculus 2, taught by Professor Harold Becker. Becker was known across campus for two things: his sharp intellect and his ego. He prided himself on challenging his students, pushing them to think critically and deeply about mathematics. But there was another side to him, a side that reveled in proving just how superior he was. He enjoyed singling out students during lectures, asking impossible questions designed to make them stumble. It wasn't uncommon to see someone leave, his class red-faced after failing one of his impromptu tests. On this particular Tuesday morning, the lecture hall was packed. Students filed in, some groggy from late-night study sessions, others chatting animatedly about weekend plans. Karoline slipped into her usual seat near the back, pulling out her notebook and pen. She preferred sitting there, not because she wanted to hide, but because it gave her space to focus without distraction. As Becker entered the room, the chatter died down almost instantly. Everyone knew what to expect when he walked in. Becker stood at the front of the room, adjusting his glasses as he scanned the rows of faces. His gaze lingered briefly on Karoline before moving on. He began the lecture with a brief recap of last week's material, then transitioned into a new topic: differential equations. His voice was steady and clear as he wrote examples on the board, explaining each step in painstaking detail. Most students followed along dutifully, taking notes and nodding along. Karoline, however, seemed distracted. She wasn't paying attention to Becker's explanation. Instead, she was lost in thought, her pencil moving rapidly across the page of her notebook. She had come across an interesting problem online the night before, one that involved using calculus to model real-world phenomena like traffic flow. It fascinated her, and she couldn't stop thinking about it. She barely noticed when Becker paused mid-lecture and turned to face the class. "All right," he said, his tone clipped. "Let's see if anyone can apply what we've learned so far." His eyes swept over the room again, finally landing on Karoline. A smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Miss Leavitt, why don't you come up here and show us how it's done?" The room fell silent. All heads turned toward Karoline, who looked up from her notebook, startled. For a moment she froze, unsure of what to do. Then slowly, she rose from her seat and made her way to the front of the room. Becker handed her a piece of chalk, pointing to a blank section of the board. On it, he had written a complex equation involving multiple variables and derivatives. "Go ahead," he said, folding his arms across his chest. "Solve this." Karoline stared at the equation for a few seconds, her mind racing. She recognized it immediately. It was a variation of something she'd encountered in her own studies. Without hesitation, she began writing, her movements fluid and precise. The rest of the class watched in stunned silence as she worked through the problem, breaking it down step by step. When she finished, she stepped back, turning to face Becker. "Well?" she asked softly, her voice barely audible. Becker frowned, clearly taken aback. Not only had Karoline solved the problem correctly, but she had done so in a way that was both elegant and efficient. He glanced at the board again, searching for flaws in her reasoning. Finding none, he cleared his throat and addressed the class. "Not bad," he admitted grudgingly, "but I suspect Miss Leavitt got lucky. Let's try another one. He erased the board and wrote a second equation, this one even more complicated than the first. Once again, Karoline stepped forward and solved it effortlessly. This time, murmurs rippled through the room as students exchanged glances, impressed by what they were witnessing. Becker, however, refused to acknowledge her skill outright. Instead, he dismissed her efforts with a wave of his hand. "I suppose memorizing formulas has its uses," he said dryly. "But let's see if you can handle something truly challenging." By now, Karoline could feel the weight of everyone's eyes on her. Part of her wanted to shrink away, to disappear into the background where she felt safest. But another part of her, the part that loved math, was determined to prove herself. She nodded silently, accepting Becker's challenge. For the next 20 minutes, Becker fired question after question at her, each one more difficult than the last. And each time, Karoline responded with ease, her answers flawless. By the end of the lecture, even Becker couldn't deny her talent. Still, he refused to give her credit, chalking up her success to luck or rote memorization rather than genuine understanding. As the class dispersed, Karoline returned to her seat feeling a mix of emotions. She was proud of herself for standing her ground, but she also felt uneasy. She hadn't meant to draw attention to herself, and the last thing she wanted was to be singled out. As she packed up her things, Rachel Kim, her best friend and fellow student, approached her. "Wow, Karoline," Rachel said, her eyes wide with admiration. "That was incredible. How did you do all that?" Karoline shrugged, trying to play it down. "It wasn't that big of a deal," she replied. "I just understood the problems." Rachel shook her head. "You're being modest. That was amazing." Becker didn't know what hit him. Karoline smiled faintly, grateful for Rachel's support. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning, that somehow Becker wasn't going to let this go. Little did she know, he was already plotting his next move, determined to prove once and for all that she wasn't as smart as she seemed. Unbeknownst to both of them, this encounter would set off a chain of events that would change everything, for Karoline, for Becker, and for the entire university. The days following Karoline's unexpected showdown with Professor Becker were filled with whispers and curious glances. Students who had barely noticed her before now watched her closely, trying to figure out if she was as brilliant as she seemed, or just lucky. Some admired her quiet confidence, others dismissed her success as a fluke. But no matter what they thought, everyone agreed on one thing: Professor Becker wasn't going to let this go. Becker spent the next few days stewing over what had happened in class. He couldn't shake the image of Karoline standing at the board, solving problems he had assumed would stump even his brightest students. It gnawed at him, not because he doubted his own abilities, but because it challenged his carefully constructed worldview. In his mind, intelligence was something you earned through years of hard work and discipline. It wasn't supposed to come easily, especially not to someone like Karoline, who seemed so unremarkable. Determined to prove himself right, Becker devised a plan. He announced during the next lecture that there would be an optional extra credit project available to anyone interested. "This isn't for the faint of heart," he warned, pacing back and forth in front of the room. "It's a highly abstract proof involving multidimensional calculus and quantum mechanics. If you think you're up to the challenge, I encourage you to try." Most students groaned inwardly at the announcement. They knew Becker well enough by now to recognize this for what it was: a trap designed to weed out anyone foolish enough to take him on. A handful of brave souls considered signing up, but after exchanging wary looks, they decided against it. No one wanted to risk their grade on something so impossibly difficult. Karoline, however, felt differently. She listened intently as Becker outlined the details of the project. Her interest piqued. The problem sounded fascinating, not just because it was complex, but because it hinted at connections between math and physics that she had always wondered about. When Becker finished speaking, she raised her hand. "Yes, Miss Leavitt?" "Becker," said, raising an eyebrow. His tone was polite, but there was a hint of mockery in his voice, as if he already knew what she was going to say. "I'd like to do the project," Karoline replied calmly, ignoring the murmurs of disbelief rippling through the room. Becker smirked. "Are you sure?" This isn't like the problems we've done. In class, this is advanced. Karoline nodded. I'm sure. For a moment, Becker looked genuinely surprised. Then his expression hardened, and he gave her a curt nod. Fine. You'll have until the end of the semester to submit your solution. Good luck. As the lecture ended, Karoline packed up her things, her mind already racing with ideas. She knew this wouldn't be easy, but she was excited by the challenge. What she didn't realize was that Becker had chosen the problem specifically to humiliate her. He believed it was unsolvable, or at least far beyond the reach of any undergraduate student. To him, this was the perfect way to put her in her place once and for all. Later that evening, Karoline sat at her desk in her dorm room, surrounded by textbooks and notebooks. She had spread out papers covered in scribbles and diagrams, each one representing a piece of the puzzle she was trying to solve. Her roommate, Rachel Kim, watched her from across the room, shaking her head in amazement. You really took him up on that? Rachel asked, leaning back in her chair. Do you know how hard that problem is supposed to be? Karoline shrugged. It's hard, but that's why I want to try. If I can figure it out, it might lead to something interesting. Rachel rolled her eyes good-naturedly. You're insane, you know that? Most people would run screaming from something like this. Maybe, Karoline admitted with a small smile. But I like figuring things out. Rachel sighed, then stood up and walked over to Karoline's desk. Well, if you're serious about this, I'll help you. Not because I understand half of what you're doing, but because you're my friend. And also because watching Becker get owned would be hilarious. Karoline laughed. Thanks, Rachel, that means a lot. Over the next several weeks, Karoline threw herself into the project. She spent hours poring over obscure research papers, hunting for clues that might help her crack the problem. Whenever she hit a roadblock, she turned to Rachel, who acted as a sounding board, asking questions that forced Karoline to clarify her thoughts. Slowly but surely, pieces of the puzzle began falling into place. One afternoon, while working in the university library, Karoline stumbled upon a reference to a little-known theorem that seemed directly related to the problem. Excited, she flagged down Rachel, who was sitting nearby studying for a biology exam. Look at this, Karoline said, pointing to a passage in the book. This could be the key. Rachel squinted at the text, her brow furrowing. Okay, I'll take your word for it. But does this mean you're close to solving it? I think so, Karoline replied, her voice tinged with excitement. There are still some gaps, but I can feel it coming together. Meanwhile, another student had taken notice of Karoline's efforts. Ethan Moore, a senior majoring in mathematics, had heard about her performance in Becker's class and was intrigued. Ethan was known for his sharp mind and competitive streak, and he had always prided himself on being the best in his field. But lately, he had started hearing rumors about Karoline, rumors that suggested she might actually be smarter than him. At first, Ethan dismissed the stories as exaggerations. After all, how could someone like Karoline, who had flown under the radar for so long, suddenly emerge as a mathematical prodigy? But curiosity got the better of him, and he began keeping tabs on her progress. He attended Becker's lectures, more frequently watching Karoline closely whenever she answered questions or worked on problems. The more he observed, the more he realized the rumors might be true. One day, Ethan decided to approach her. He waited until after class, when most students had left, and walked up to her desk. Hey, Karoline, he said, his tone casual but friendly. Can I talk to you for a minute? Karoline looked up, surprised to see him. Sure. What's up? Ethan hesitated for a moment, then plunged ahead. I've been hearing a lot about your work on Becker's extra credit project. I just wanted to say, it's impressive, really impressive. Karoline blinked, caught off guard by the compliment. Oh, thanks. I'm still working on it though, so we'll see how it turns out. Well, if you need a second opinion or a collaborator, I'd be happy to help, Ethan offered. I've been working on some similar stuff, and maybe we could bounce ideas off each other. Karoline considered his offer for a moment. On one hand, she appreciated the gesture. On the other, she wasn't sure she wanted to share her work with someone else, especially someone as accomplished as Ethan. But something in his expression made her trust him. "Okay," she said finally. "That sounds good." Over the next few weeks, Karoline and Ethan met regularly to discuss the project. Their conversations were intense and fast-paced, filled with equations, theories, and debates. At first, Ethan assumed he would be the one guiding the discussion, given his experience. But as they delved deeper into the problem, he found himself learning just as much from Karoline as she did from him. "She's incredible," Ethan told Rachel one day when they ran into each other in the library. I thought I was good at this stuff, but she's on another level entirely," Rachel grinned. "Told you, she's unstoppable." As the deadline for the project approached, Karoline and Ethan grew closer, their mutual respect evolving into genuine friendship. Together, they refined Karoline's solution, adding layers of complexity and elegance that neither of them could have achieved alone. By the time they submitted their work, both of them were confident it was something special. What they didn't know was that Becker had been watching them too, and he was furious. The day of the special session to review submissions for the extra credit project arrived, and the lecture hall buzzed with anticipation. Word had spread quickly about Karoline Leavitt's involvement in the challenge, and students packed the room, eager to see how things would unfold. Even those who weren't enrolled in Advanced Calculus 2 showed up, curious to witness what was shaping up to be a legendary showdown between Professor Harold Becker and the unassuming sophomore. Becker stood at the front of the room, his usual air of confidence tinged with something darker. Nervousness, perhaps, or irritation. He adjusted his glasses repeatedly as he glanced over the two submissions sitting on the desk before him. Only two students had dared to attempt the problem: Ethan Moore, a senior math prodigy whose reputation preceded him, and Karoline, the yachty, quiet girl who had somehow managed to outshine everyone's expectations. Ethan sat near the front, calm but alert, while Karoline lingered toward the back of the room, her notebook clutched tightly in her hands. She wasn't comfortable being the center of attention, but she knew there was no avoiding it now. Rachel Kim, ever supportive, sat beside her, offering quiet encouragement. "All right," Becker began, his voice cutting through the murmurs in the room. "Let's get started. As you all know, this project was designed to push boundaries, to test whether any of you could rise to the level of true mathematical innovation." His gaze swept over the crowd, lingering briefly on Karoline. "Only two of you were brave, or foolish, enough to try. Let's see if either of you succeeded." He picked up Ethan's submission first, flipping through the pages with an expression that shifted between approval and skepticism. "Mr. Moore," he said, addressing Ethan directly, "your solution is commendable. You've demonstrated a solid understanding of the material and applied advanced techniques effectively. However," he paused, tapping the paper with his finger, "while your approach is technically correct, it lacks originality. It's clear you relied heavily on established methods rather than forging new ground." Ethan nodded, accepting the critique without argument. He hadn't expected Becker to praise him outright, and he understood the criticism was fair. Still, he couldn't help feeling a flicker of frustration. He had worked hard on his solution, but deep down, he knew it didn't compare to what Karoline had accomplished. "And now," Becker continued, turning to Karoline's submission, "we come to Miss Leavitt." His tone carried a note of mockery, as if he already knew what he was going to say. He opened her notebook, scanning the pages with growing unease. For several long moments he said nothing, his brow furrowing deeper with each passing second. Finally, he looked up, his face unreadable. "Miss Leavitt," he said slowly, "would you care to explain this?" Karoline hesitated, then stood and made her way to the front of the room. Becker handed her the notebook, and she took it, her hands steady. Despite the weight of everyone's eyes on her, she turned to the board and began writing, translating her complex equations into simpler terms so the rest of the class could follow along. As she explained her reasoning, the room fell silent. Her solution wasn't just correct, it was revolutionary. She had taken the abstract proof Becker had assigned and expanded upon it, introducing a framework that bridged gaps between classical calculus and modern physics. The implications of her work were staggering, hinting at applications in fields as diverse as cryptography, artificial intelligence, and quantum computing. When she finished, she turned to face the room, her expression calm but expectant. The silence stretched for several seconds before someone in the audience whispered, "Wow." Becker stared at the board, his jaw clenched. He couldn't deny the brilliance of what Karoline had done, but he refused to acknowledge it openly. Instead, he crossed his arms and said, "This is impressive, I'll admit. But how do we know you didn't plagiarize these ideas? Where did you even come up with something like this?" Karoline blinked, surprised by the accusation. "I didn't copy anyone," she replied firmly. "I built on concepts I found in research papers, ones you probably haven't read because they're not widely known. If you'd like, I can show you the references." Before Becker could respond, Ethan stepped in. "Professor," he said, standing and addressing the room, "there's no question that Karoline's work is original. I've been working with her on this project and I can vouch for her process. What she's done here isn't just solving the problem, it's redefining how we think about it." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. Several students nodded, impressed by Ethan's defense of Karoline. Becker, however, wasn't ready to concede. "Even if that's true," he snapped, "it doesn't change the fact that this kind of thinking is reckless. Mathematics requires precision, not wild speculation." "That's not fair," Ethan shot back. "What Karoline has done is exactly what mathematics needs: innovation. Just because it challenges conventional methods doesn't make it wrong." The tension in the room was palpable. Becker glared at Ethan, then at Karoline, searching for a way to regain control. But before he could say anything else, Dean Foster entered the lecture hall, drawn by the commotion. A tall, imposing figure with a reputation for fairness, the dean surveyed the scene with a raised eyebrow. "What's going on here?" he asked, his voice carrying authority. Becker stammered, caught off guard. "Dean Foster, I was simply reviewing the submissions for my extra credit project. There seems to be some disagreement about the validity of one student's work." Foster turned to Karoline. "Miss Leavitt, would you care to explain?" Karoline took a deep breath and summarized her solution, pointing to the board where her equations were still visible. When she finished, Foster studied them carefully, nodding thoughtfully. "This is remarkable," he said finally. "It's clear you've made a significant contribution to the field. Professor Becker, I assume you'll be giving Miss Leavitt full credit for this?" Becker hesitated, clearly reluctant. But under the dean's stern gaze, he had no choice. "Of course," he muttered. "Full credit." The room erupted into applause, though Becker quickly dismissed the class before anyone could celebrate further. As students filed out, many stopped to congratulate Karoline, shaking her hand or offering words of admiration. Ethan lingered behind, waiting until the crowd thinned before approaching her. "You are amazing," he said, smiling. "I told you, you're unstoppable." Karoline smiled back, though she still seemed uneasy. "Thanks, Ethan. I couldn't have done it without your help." "Don't sell yourself short," he replied. "This was all you. I just tagged along for the ride." Rachel joined them, grinning ear to ear. "Can we go grab coffee now because I feel like we need to celebrate?" Karoline laughed, finally allowing herself to relax. "Sure. Coffee sounds great." Later that evening, as Karoline lay in bed, replaying the events of the day, she couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was coming. She had proven herself to Becker, and to everyone else. But she knew this wasn't the end. Her work had opened doors she hadn't even realized existed, and she was both excited and terrified by the possibilities. Meanwhile, Becker sat alone in his office, staring at the blank screen of his computer. He had spent years building his reputation as a brilliant mathematician and educator, yet today he had been humbled by a student half his age. The bitterness gnawed at him, but beneath it lay a flicker of something else, admiration perhaps, or regret. Whatever it was, he couldn't ignore it. Unbeknownst to either of them, The impact of Karoline's discovery was only beginning to ripple outward. Researchers across the country were already taking notice, and soon her name would appear in academic journals and conference invitations. But for now, she remained focused on the next step, refining her theory and exploring its potential applications. As she drifted off to sleep, one thought stayed with her. No matter what challenges lay ahead, she was ready to face them. After all, she had always found strength in numbers, and now she had the world's attention. The weeks following the special session were a whirlwind for Karoline Leavitt. Her groundbreaking solution to Becker's extra credit project had sparked conversations far beyond Ridgewood University. Professors and researchers from other institutions began reaching out, eager to learn more about her work. Some sent emails asking for clarifications. Others invited her to present at conferences or collaborate on further studies. It was overwhelming but also exhilarating. Ethan Moore remained by her side throughout it all, acting as both a collaborator and a friend. Together, they dove deeper into the implications of Karoline's theory, refining its details and exploring how it could be applied in real-world scenarios. Their partnership quickly became the stuff of campus legend, with students whispering about the math duo who might just change the world. Karoline and Ethan spent countless hours in the university library, surrounded by stacks of books and papers. They debated ideas late into the night, fueled by cups of coffee that grew cold long before they remembered to drink them. Rachel Kim often joined them, though her role was more observational than participatory. She didn't understand much of what they discussed, but she loved watching the dynamic between them. How Karoline's quiet brilliance complemented Ethan's confident curiosity. "You two are like a math version of Sherlock and Watson," Rachel joked one evening as she flipped through a magazine while Karoline sketched equations on a whiteboard. "Except way less dramatic," Ethan laughed, leaning back in his chair. "If I'm Watson, does that mean I'm the sidekick?" "Nope," Rachel replied without missing a beat. "You're definitely the annoying flatmate who eats all the snacks." Karoline smiled faintly, pausing her writing to glance at them. "Can we focus? We still need to figure out how this applies to encryption algorithms." Right, Ethan said, sitting up straighter. "Sorry, Karoline. Back to business." Their collaboration wasn't without challenges. There were moments when disagreements arose, particularly when Ethan suggested tweaking parts of Karoline's original framework. He argued that simplifying certain elements would make their findings easier to communicate to a wider audience. Karoline, however, resisted any changes that might dilute the elegance of her solution. "It's not about making it simpler," she insisted during one heated discussion. "It's about preserving the integrity of the proof. If we start cutting corners, we lose the whole point." Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I get that. But if no one can understand it, what's the point of sharing it at all? We need to strike a balance." In the end, they compromised, finding ways to explain complex concepts without sacrificing accuracy. Their combined efforts resulted in a revised paper that was both rigorous and accessible, a rare feat in academic circles. When they submitted it to a prestigious mathematics journal, they did so with cautious optimism. While Karoline and Ethan worked tirelessly on their research, Professor Harold Becker struggled to come to terms with his own failures. The humiliation of being bested by a student lingered like a shadow over everything he did. His lectures became even more abrasive, his critiques sharper, as if lashing out at others might somehow restore his wounded pride. But beneath the surface, something unexpected was happening. Becker found himself revisiting Karoline's solution again and again, poring over her notes and diagrams in private. At first he told himself he was looking for flaws, determined to prove that her work wasn't as flawless as everyone claimed. Yet the more he studied it, the more he realized there was no denying its brilliance. One evening, after yet another sleepless night spent analyzing her equations, Becker sat alone in his office, staring at the wall. For years he had prided himself on being the smartest person in every room he entered. Now, for the first time, he felt truly humbled, not just by Karoline's intellect, but by her humility. Despite his attempts to undermine her, she had handled everything with grace and dignity, never once stooping to his level. Becker's thoughts turned to his own career. He had always believed that intelligence was power, a tool to dominate and control. But watching Karoline, he saw a different kind of strength, one rooted in collaboration, curiosity, and a genuine love for learning. It made him question whether he had been using his talents wisely or selfishly. The next morning, Becker arrived at his office early, carrying a stack of papers. Among them was a nomination form for a prestigious award given annually to outstanding undergraduate mathematicians. He hesitated for a moment, pen poised above the page, then filled it out carefully. Under reason for nomination, he wrote simply, "Her work represents the future of mathematics." He sealed the envelope and sent it off anonymously, knowing it would likely be traced back to him eventually. It wasn't an apology exactly, but it was a start. As news of Karoline's achievements spread, opportunities began pouring in. Top universities offered her scholarships and fellowships, tech companies extended job offers, and research institutes invited her to join their teams. She was overwhelmed by the attention but tried to stay grounded, reminding herself why she had started studying math in the first place. "I don't want fame," she told Rachel one afternoon as they walked across campus. "I just want to keep solving problems." "Well, good luck with that," Rachel teased, "because people aren't going to stop talking about you anytime soon." Despite her modesty, Karoline couldn't deny the excitement building around her. Even Dean Foster seemed thrilled, praising her publicly at faculty meetings and encouraging her to pursue graduate studies. "You have a gift," he told her during one meeting. "Don't let anyone, including yourself, stand in your way." Ethan, too, was gaining recognition for his contributions. While he knew Karoline deserved most of the credit, he appreciated the acknowledgement. More importantly, he cherished the bond they had formed. Over the months, their relationship had deepened, evolving into something neither of them had anticipated. They weren't just colleagues anymore. They were friends, partners in every sense of the word. One evening, as they packed up their things, after another marathon study session, Ethan turned to Karoline with a soft smile. "You know," he said, "this has been one of the best experiences of my life. Working with you, it's changed the way I think about math and about myself." Karoline looked at him, surprised by the sincerity in his voice. "Same here," she admitted. "I couldn't have done any of this without you." For a moment they stood there, the weight of unspoken feelings hanging in the air. Then Ethan cleared his throat and glanced away. "Anyway, we should probably head home. Big day tomorrow." Karoline nodded, smiling. "Yeah, big day." The big day came sooner than expected. Within weeks, Karoline and Ethan received word that their paper had been accepted for publication in one of the most respected journals in the field. The announcement sent ripples of excitement through Ridgewood University, cementing their status as rising stars in the mathematical community. At the same time, Becker's anonymous nomination caught the attention of the awards committee. Though initially skeptical, they decided to investigate further, interviewing professors and students alike. By the time the award ceremony rolled around, it was clear that Karoline was a deserving recipient. On the night of the event, Karoline stood, nervously backstage, adjusting the hem of her dress. Rachel, who had insisted on helping her get ready, gave her a reassuring pat on the shoulder. "You've got this," she whispered. "Just go out there and be amazing." When Karoline stepped onto the stage to accept her award, the auditorium erupted into applause. She scanned the crowd, spotting familiar faces: Rachel, Ethan, even Dean Foster, who gave her a proud thumbs up. And then, near the back of the room, she saw Becker. His expression was unreadable, but for the first time she thought she detected a hint of respect. As she delivered her acceptance speech, Karoline reflected on how far she had come. From the quiet girl blending into the background to the center of attention, she had discovered not only her own potential, but also the power of perseverance and collaboration. She ended her remarks with a simple message: mathematics isn't about competition, it's about connection. Let's keep working together to solve the problems that matter. The audience erupted into cheers, and as Karoline returned to her seat, she felt a profound sense of gratitude. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for certain. Whatever came next, she was ready. The months that followed Karoline's award ceremony were a blur of activity. She graduated early from Ridgewood University, earning top honors and leaving behind a legacy that would be talked about for years to come. Her groundbreaking work with Ethan had not only earned her recognition, but also opened doors she could never have imagined. Scholarships and fellowships poured in, each one offering her the chance to continue her research at some of the world's most prestigious institutions. Karoline chose to accept a fellowship at the Institute for Advanced Mathematical Studies, a renowned research center known for fostering innovation in theoretical sciences. It was a dream opportunity, one that allowed her to focus entirely on her passion without the distractions of teaching or administrative duties. Ethan joined her there as well, having secured his own position as a junior researcher. Together, they formed part of a team working on cutting-edge projects that pushed the boundaries of mathematics and its applications. Their days were filled with intense collaboration, brainstorming sessions, and experiments that sometimes stretched late into the night. The institute buzzed with energy, a melting pot of brilliant minds all striving toward discovery. For Karoline, it felt like stepping into a new chapter of her life, a chapter where she wasn't just solving problems, but shaping the future. Rachel. Kim stayed in touch, sending regular updates about life back at Ridgewood. She had switched majors to data science, inspired by Karoline's success, and often joked about following in her footsteps. "You better save me a spot when I get famous," she wrote in one email. Karoline laughed, replying, "There's room for everyone." Despite the excitement of her new role, Karoline remained humble. She never sought the spotlight, preferring instead to let her work speak for itself. But fame had a way of finding her anyway. Journalists wrote profiles about the math genius who changed the game, while tech companies vied for her attention, hoping to recruit her for lucrative positions. Yet through it all, Karoline stayed true to herself, focusing on what mattered most, the joy of discovery. Back at Ridgewood University, Professor Harold Becker's career took a sharp turn. His reputation had suffered after the events surrounding Karoline's project, and many students began avoiding his classes altogether. Complaints about his abrasive teaching style piled up, prompting an investigation by the administration. Though he avoided formal punishment, the scrutiny forced him to reflect deeply on his actions and their consequences. Becker started making changes, subtle at first but increasingly noticeable. He softened his tone during lectures, encouraging questions rather than shutting them down. When students struggled, he offered guidance rather than criticism. Slowly, the atmosphere in his classroom shifted. Students began to see him not as an adversary, but as someone genuinely invested in their growth. One day, near the end of the semester, Becker received a letter from the awards committee. It was a thank you note for nominating Karoline, along with a request to serve on a panel discussing mentorship in academia. At first, he hesitated, unsure if he deserved such an honor, but something inside him clicked. Maybe this was his chance to make amends, not just to Karoline but to himself. He accepted the invitation and prepared diligently for the panel, drawing on his recent experiences to share insights about fostering talent and nurturing curiosity. His words resonated with the audience, earning him unexpected praise. For the first time in years, Becker felt a sense of purpose beyond his own ego. Teaching, he realized, wasn't about proving superiority. It was about inspiring others to reach their potential. As Karoline settled into her new life at the Institute, she found herself thinking often about Ridgewood and the people who had shaped her journey. Rachel's unwavering support, Ethan's partnership, and even Becker's challenges. All of it had played a part in bringing her to where she was today. She knew she couldn't have done it alone, and that realization only deepened her appreciation for those around her. Ethan, too, had grown in ways neither of them had anticipated. Their professional relationship had blossomed into something more personal, though they kept things quiet, preferring to focus on their work. Still, there were moments, Late-night conversations over coffee, shared laughter during stressful deadlines that hinted at feelings neither of them had fully acknowledged yet. One evening, as they walked home from the institute under a sky dotted with stars, Ethan broke the silence. "You know," he said, glancing at her, "I used to think being the best was everything. Winning awards, publishing papers, it was all I cared about. And now?" Caroline asked, curious. "Now?" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Now I think the best part of all this is doing it with someone I trust, someone who makes me better." Caroline looked at him, surprised by the warmth in his voice. "You've made me better too," she admitted softly. "I wouldn't be here without you." They stopped walking, standing face to face beneath the glow of a street lamp. For a moment, neither spoke, the weight of unspoken emotions hanging between them. Then Ethan smiled, breaking the tension. "Well, we're quite the team, aren't we?" Caroline grinned. "Yeah, we are." Months turned into years, and Caroline's influence continued to grow. Her theories became foundational pillars in fields ranging from cryptography to artificial intelligence. Companies developed algorithms based on her frameworks, revolutionizing industries and improving lives. Conferences invited her to deliver keynote speeches, where she spoke passionately about the importance of collaboration and perseverance. During one such conference, held at a grand auditorium packed with academics, researchers, and industry leaders, Caroline stood before a sea of faces, her voice steady and clear. She recounted her journey, from the quiet girl in Becker's calculus class to the mathematician standing before them today. She spoke of failure and triumph, of doubters and supporters, and of the countless hours spent chasing ideas that seemed impossible. "When I started studying math," she said, her eyes scanning the crowd, "I didn't do it for awards or recognition. I did it because I loved solving puzzles, uncovering patterns, and understanding the world a little better. And I learned something important along the way. None of us can achieve greatness alone. Every breakthrough, every discovery, it's built on the shoulders of others." Her gaze landed briefly on Ethan, sitting near the front row, then moved to Rachel, who had flown in to attend the event. Finally, she thought of Becker, whose redemption story had taught her the value of second chances. "So let's keep asking questions," she concluded. "Let's keep pushing boundaries. And most importantly, let's keep working together. Because when we do, the possibilities are endless." The audience erupted into applause, rising to their feet in admiration. As Caroline stepped off the stage, she felt a profound sense of fulfillment. This wasn't the end of her journey, it was just the beginning. There were still problems to solve, mysteries to unravel, and connections to forge, and she was ready for all of it. In the years to come, Caroline's name would appear in textbooks, her theories cited in dissertations, and her story told in classrooms around the world. But for now, she simply smiled, grateful for the path she had taken, and excited for whatever lay ahead.